Hi, I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about what I consider one of the most important personal development practices that you and I can take on in our lives. And that's the practice of taking on the perspective of other people. Now, it's a developmental practice, but I'll admit it's also a spiritual practice, and you can label it whatever you want. I recognize that many people look at certain practices as spiritual practices, but for some people, that's very woo-woo like, and they don't want to do anything woo-woo. So if your belief structure is such that there is no non-material realm, that there is no spiritual realm, etc., then look at this as a developmental practice, that you as a human being can grow and develop your greater sense of care and concern for humanity and the planet, and that can serve as a healing factor for yourself and for your experience in dealing with others. Some of you may be surprised for me to say that one of the most important practices you can do is taking on the perspective of others, and I'm not using meditation as the most important practice. Well, I consider meditation to be very important, but I consider it to go hand in hand with the taking the perspective of others, because one of the things that meditation does is it allows us to withdraw from the busyness of life and to recognize that there's more to life than what's going on and the stuff that's going on around us. So it allows us to slow down our thinking and to grow a different perspective about life in general through the process of meditation. Meditation also grows a greater sense of oneness and interaction with a greater non-dual nature of life. But for many people, meditation is simply a physical process that allows us to gain access to better heart rates and a better sense of peace in our consciousness. And no matter how you look at meditation, whether you look at it from a material standpoint or from a spiritual standpoint, it can be a very important developmental practice for you. Similarly is taking the perspective of others. Now, why do I consider this so important? If we go into meditation and we come back into the world after the relaxed nature and the sense of peacefulness that meditation gives us, we come back into a material world where we're facing a lot of divisiveness, a lot of people who look at life as zero-sum games where they want to win at the cost of other people. There's a lot of me versus you kind of thinking going on the planet right now. In fact, it's kind of interesting. I talk to a lot of friends and people that are very concerned about what's happening on planet Earth, the very nature that we seem to be going through, a cycle of experience where we are focused more on how we're different than how we are alike. And the practice of taking the perspective of others is like a force that pushes on that pendulum as we swing out into divisiveness and caring less about humanity in general, that we, through our actions and practicing a compassion of taking the perspective of others, can bring that pendulum swing back towards a greater level of care and concern for humanity and for the planet. You know, it's been said that one of the ways in which we develop is morally, and I know in Ken Wilber's integral work, he talks about a moral line of development where we are born onto the planet and we're very egocentric. We only care about ourselves. And that over time, we learn to develop, at least care about like-minded people or our group. Now, our group can be people who are in the same religion, they're in our family, they think like we do, or maybe they belong to the same political party, the same country, but we have some group that we define ourselves as our group, and people who are in our group, we have care for them, but we don't care for people who are outside our group. But that moral line of development, higher levels of care and concern, can take us from that egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric provision. That world-centric level where we have a love for life itself, for humanity itself. And that's something to aspire to in a developmental pattern, is to grow our care and concern for more and more people. And in one of the ways in which to do that is, again, to develop taking on the perspective of other people. Now, whether you see it as a spiritual growth process or a developmental process, is up to you. But the question then becomes, how do you go about taking on the perspective of others? It's kind of funny. A couple of days ago, I was driving with my dog to the park, and I was pulling into the parking lot, and I moved around a spate of cars, and one of the cars that was parked in one of the parking spots started coming out head on just as I came around the corner where they were parked. And the woman who was driving and I both simultaneously slammed on our brakes, recognizing we were about to crash. Now, in that moment, my first reaction was, she was wrong, I was right, she's coming out of a parking space, I've got the right of way. If we had crashed, it would have been her fault, and I'm in the right. All through my life, that's been my perspective, until I started trying to develop an understanding about how other people could be right in certain moments. Now, this isn't about making somebody right or wrong. I want to be very clear about this. This is about understanding other people and having compassion for them. Too much of our time, we want to divide ourselves from people, and we do that by saying, I'm right in either how I acted or how I believe in this moment. And we tend to want to build a wall around ourselves and protect ourselves and say, in our righteousness, to claim our rightness. And in doing that, we push away the other person and make them wrong. And for that woman in that moment who was driving the other car, I could have stayed there. But through the healthy practice that I've done through the years of trying to take the perspective of others, I immediately thought, well, how did she perceive this? And she probably saw that I was maybe driving a little fast coming into the parking lot. And maybe as I came around the bend, maybe I was coming out of her blind spot and she couldn't have seen me. So in that moment, I was able to not only see my perspective, but see her perspective. And that takes a lot of practice and a lot of development. I won't say that I'm 100% successful in every moment seeing the other person's perspective, but I have grown in it over the years, and I applaud myself for the effort to do that. And I would encourage you to do the same. So how do you go about developing that, taking on the perspective of others? Well, like everything, it starts with setting an intention. It sets an intention that you want to open yourself to be more compassionate to other human beings and seeing things from their perspective. And now, as I stated a minute ago, it's not about letting them be right at the expense of you being wrong. It's not a win-lose kind of scenario. We have to, in setting that intention of being more compassionate, move from seeing life as being about me winning and you losing to be about how can I bring more kindness and love into this moment and let go of the sense of winning and losing. In fact, it's often been stated that if it's more important to be kind than to win. Now, yes, there's going to be moments that people are so egregious in their behavior that you have to have healthy boundaries and set up some protective defenses around you. So I'm not talking about letting yourself be a doormat and people running over you. In fact, there's circumstances where, somebody is so lost in their sense of divisiveness and wanting to win that they may be taking threatening actions towards you. It's happened to me plenty of times. And in those moments, what I have to do is not push back, protect myself if necessary, but oftentimes just let it go and remove myself from the circumstances. Sometimes it's more important to go away and let them be emotional in that moment. And when I retreat into my own safe space, I can then try to practice understanding them a little bit better. In the heat of the moment, it's very difficult to do that. But when we can take ourselves away with a little distance and a little calmness, then we can open ourselves to it. So set the intention, have healthy boundaries, set a desire to be more kind than to win, remove yourself when necessary, and probably the most important thing is to put yourself in their shoes. Now, a little thing that I do, and you can develop your own skills and abilities, and you probably already got some techniques on your own on how to do this. But one of the things I like to do is say to myself, well, if I had lived their life and walked in their shoes, I would probably think like they do. I would probably act like they do. And so when I encounter somebody that I have judgment about, and here's a little side note for you, that when you judge others, it's really about yourself. when you judge others, it's talking about your own beliefs that you've developed that lead you into judging that other as being wrong. So moments of judgment are learning moments for us to stop and say, how did I learn that that's something that I judge as less than or wrong in life? And it's something worth pushing into and developing. But in those moments where you're feeling your righteousness come upon you and you're judging others as wrong and you're being right, then open yourself to eliminating conflict and acting from love. What is it for you that you can do that? Like I said, you can develop your own practices. You've probably already got some. But I would encourage you not to react. And one of the most important things you can do is to set a gap of a space between the event occurring in the material world and your reaction to it, to setting a gap of time where you can choose how you're going to act. So many times we don't have that gap and we react automatically. And it's going to happen. And give yourself compassion when it occurs and set the intention to do better next time. But try to build up the ability to not immediately react when events that you judge happen, and instead build a pause and consciously choose how you choose to react in that moment. And when you consciously choose, try to insert what would bring more love, more compassion in this moment. How can I choose to connect us rather than divide us? How can I be love in this moment? Ask yourself these and similar questions that allow yourself to break down the sense of divisiveness and the sense of conflict between you and others, and to bring a unity and bondedness of oneness with that other person. Taking on the perspective of others can be one of the most important things that you do, because it builds a muscle of love within you, a love and compassion. And as we become more compassionate and have higher degrees of care towards our fellow humans, we're actually developing on that spiritual path of seeing and developing a sense of oneness to all of life. So what are you going to choose to do? You know, there's no savior coming to save our planet from all of the divisiveness that we're experiencing. There's no political party or person who's going to heal this. The only people who can make a difference and change the planet to one of more love and compassion is you and it's I, by setting these intentions and acting with love and compassion. I hope this has been beneficial. Thanks for watching.